It is necessary for the recording of sound to convert the sound waves to corresponding changes in light. The sound waves produced by my voice are transmitted through the air to the microphone, where these sound waves are converted to changes in an electric current. These variations in the electric current are then amplified and used to control the light. This varying beam of light falling on the photoelectric cell produces variations.
Some of my favorite people to have on as well. I really have to say, in the last few months, I really enjoyed doing a lot of work with all of these guests, and I really do consider them occult rejects, even though J.J. Vance himself does not consider himself an occultist. He is very good at finding things that not everybody else sees. So, in a sense, you can be an occultist in your own way, but, I really do...
Technically, I am if I may interject there, Nick, I appreciate the kind words, sir. Technically, I am a ceremonial magician according to the Mormons.
That's right. I
was ordained into multiple of their magical orders.
Wow, damn, all right. You got more than me then. But like for real, I really do all consider you like occult rejects, and I'm really happy to have you all on the show, especially to cover this topic. I'm actually surprised I haven't gotten to it yet. It was something that I really did want to eventually get into, but like I didn't know too much myself. And Headless had hit me up, and he was like, yo, we should really try to cover this. And I was like, yo, I'm totally down. I just need, I want to get a few other people to make up for the lack of knowledge I have. And we'll make it happen. And so I got tonight on this whole panel here, it's like a party. I got Liza with us. What is going on, Liza? Thank you very much for jumping on.
Excited to be here.
Of course. I'm happy to have you here. We got Barb back with us again, BD Salerno, with the birth charts and the true crime in the sky. So
hello,
BD. Let everybody know what your deal is, real quick, for new people, and where they can find your stuff.
Well, my deal is I'm basically an astrologer and an author. I have 5 books out. Not going to run through all the titles. If you're interested, go to Amazon and search BD Salerno. And interested in all things occult, unusual, and strange. My website is strangebutTrueCrime.com, and I'm on Twitter at StarSleuth.
Awesome. And I think I put a bunch of your links in the bottom already. And then we got my man Headless. What is going on, my man?
Yeah, I think you've had, yeah.
Let everybody know what your deal is and where they can find your stuff at.
Well, I go by the Headless Giant. You can find me on YouTube. You can find me on X. You can listen to a couple of my podcast episodes on Spotify. And this topic really interested me because as a former Indiana native or person who lived there, I saw a lot of connections with what I was seeing in Fort Wayne and what's happening with this case. And so I thought, we got to cover it because this is, there's so many elements of this specific case that branch out into so many other different directions, and we're definitely going to get into all that.
Awesome. Yeah, I'm really excited to do this because, it's funny how, in my opinion, the Idaho 4 and Gilgo is riddled with occultism, but nobody else is really seeing that, and that's what I covered. This case, I guess because people are already kind of pointing out, what's up with these symbols and the Odinism and all this and that. I guess maybe I was like, whatever. But, it really does make sense for me to actually cover this. So I'm really looking forward to hearing what you all got. And last but not least, the man himself, J.J. Vance, thank you very much for coming on again. So
appreciate the invite, Nick. I look forward to the conversation. With the whole team here, and I'm the host of Operation GCD, and my links I'm sure will be in the my link tree will be in the description of the show notes here. I'm sure Nick will put it in there.
Yeah, if not
as he always does.
Yes, I try to.
Nice, and I like to discuss matters of an occult nature on my podcast. Usually focusing more on the sociological aspects of cults and how they operate. Especially, historically speaking, and modern day cults. And that's more or less what I discuss on my podcast. Outside of that, I like to delve into just other areas of, that are taboo topics in our modern age of censorship here in Mean World 2023.
Nice. And I do like to also add, for people out there, I know there are a lot of fans of the whole smiley face killer situation. Definitely go check out his stuff on that. He has some very good information on that. It might be different than what other people have covered. You know, I like to try to promote your stuff.
Appreciate
on
that.
Yeah, of course.
Appreciate that. In fact, I was just publishing actually tonight the smiley face killers discussion that you, Lisa, and I had a couple months back here on your show.
Nice. Awesome.
I had never published that on my podcast yet, so I was actually just publishing it tonight. So I appreciate the promotion.
Look how that worked out. Oh, very good. So, yes, this is going to be a good chat, and we're going to let Headless start this off again. I guess since it was his idea, why not? You know. So I guess if for the people who don't even know what this case is, you know, I guess we can get started with you.
Well, the way to start it off is definitely the setting. So this is in Delphi, Indiana, a very, very small town. In I believe it's just north or west of Indianapolis, right? And so it's a sleepy community.
Just northwest of there, between like Lafayette and Fort Wayne, if I may provide a more specific geographical area.
And so this place, what attracted my attention to it is how flat and unbelievably flat this area is. And in my area where I was growing up in was Fort Wayne, impossibly flat. And there was this one part, the Devil's Gorge, where everybody would go to smoke pot, right? And there was this winding trail right along a river where we called it Rhodeyville, right? So that's where you go and you could just wind around back there. Nobody's going to pull you over. It's a good time had by all. But there's a lot of psychological influence that goes into this because there's no raised peaks, there's nothing, and these gorges just pop out of nowhere, right? So one minute you're just driving along flat as can be for hundreds of miles, and then all of a sudden you're in this huge gorge. Well, this area where this incident happened was in one of these gorges, right? It was just carved out by this water, and there's an immense amount of psychological connection there. You can hear it when you listen to the interviews with the detectives and with eyewitnesses. This is where people go to have their fun, right? This is the park. This is the park for the whole town. Everybody goes there, which is, you know, really kind of interesting. You know, there's a deep connection to this geographic location. So as we get started, the date is, let's see, 2/13/17. Very important date. 2/13/2017. The location is Manon High Bridge in Carroll County, Indiana, right? Okay, so the two victims in this case are two little girls, one named Abigail Joyce Abby Williams, and one named Liberty Rose or Libby German, right? So Abby and Libby. I think that's kind of symbolic too. Like
I've thought
the
that
same sounding names.
You even get the A and the L.
Right.
Al, like Liba Al, or whatever stuff like that.
You're starting to see it. And they're killed on 2/13. One's 13, one's 14. There's some very interesting numbers going on in this case. So the timeline. The two girls are dropped off by their older sister on one side of the road. Now, what's very interesting about this Manon High Bridge, it's a train trestle bridge. It is not meant for walking on. This is meant for trains. So the only reason why people go out here and walk on it is because of the fact that it's so high up. There's such a huge, change in geography that people love to just walk over this huge bridge over this, river, right? So, they get dropped off on one side of the road. On the other side of the road, there is no connecting trail. It's a dead end. You've got to come back across the Manon High Bridge, right? So they get dropped off, and when Abby and Libby fail to show up on the other side of the trail to be picked up by Libby's father, a search ensues, finding the two girls the next day dead by stab wounds, surrounded by effigies and one unspent shell casing. So this is a bullet that has not been fired, right? Found between them. The police asked the public for tips, and for 2 years they're getting all these tips about all their neighbors and everybody's under suspicion, and I think that's part of it. I'm not exactly sure, but this sounds like some kind of it sounds like a scapegoating ritual, right? And all of these people are participating as they're sort of ratting out their friends and ratting out their neighbors and even ratting out the police department. A lot of the reports that came in, and it's funny because CNN did a full podcast show about this. Now, they left out a lot of details, obviously, CNN.
Yeah,
right? But they're leaving out details left and right, and they go over all the basic facts of it, and they just keep replaying them over and over again, the parts that are the most ritualistically significant, while not actually talking about the ritual. So, for instance, the video footage found and all the rest of it. And so, after about 3 years, they decided that they were going to arrest this guy named Richard Allen, who came forward with a tip saying he was there that day, right? And so they targeted him, and they said, well, he was there that day, so we're going to pick him to be, the scapegoat. So they fabricated a bunch of claims in the warrant for his arrest, which has been proven thus far. They arrested him, and he's been sitting in jail with his attorneys being hampered from actually providing a decent defense for him. Now, these are not opinions. These are all facts that have come out in the case, right? And so where we're at now is the attorneys for Richard Allen have requested a review by the Indiana Supreme Court as to the practices of this judge who is basically railroading this guy. And the trial is taking place in Fort Wayne, Indiana. So they decided instead of going south towards Indianapolis, they were going to hold the trial up in Fort Wayne, Indiana. And it's been nothing but a shit show, basically. So that's the basic outline of where we're at.
Yeah, I have a question, just real quick.
Go
I don't want to forget it. This is like kind of maybe a silly question. I don't even know. Maybe J.J. Vance might know. Was it ever mentioned? This is silly though. What would the shell casing be made out of, or what it was made out of? What metal it was?
Oh, that's a good question. I mean, more than likely brass.
I was thinking that.
Yeah, more than likely brass.
That's just interesting because sometimes that's kind of like a replacement for copper with Venus, or sometimes brass can even be used at like crossing the abyss where Thoth is.
Well, that's interesting because I think this
40 millimeter is going to have a metal jacket, so that's going to be the copper. But I'm not sure if this was metal jacketed or.
No, I don't even know. Did they release the caliber? I know they claimed to have matched it to a gun found at Richard Allen's home.
Right. Yeah, I think it was a 40. 40. Let me see. I was
going to say, don't tell me you're like a 40. Do they make 44s?
40 caliber?
40? Yeah, 40.40. Yeah, 40 cal. Yeah, yep. I mean, I think it is interesting that they found this shell casing, an unspent shell at the scene, meaning it's never been fired.
44 could go with like Jupiter and abundance of energy.
Well, they call it an unspent shell casing. They don't call it a bullet, which is weird to me. They're saying this shell casing's never been fired. They matched it through some sort of weird forensic process that even Richard Allen's defense attorneys are claiming is basically fictional. This fictional scientific process in which to forensically tie this unspent shell, or I'm sorry, I believe it's was it unspent or spent shell case? Now that I say that, I don't recall. I thought they listed as unspent. Yeah, I thought that's what they listed as, but even as I'm describing it, it makes no sense to me. But yeah,
that's like a calling card, maybe.
Richard Allen's gun to this shell casing. So I think it is
the only way that you can actually have the imprint of Richard Allen's gun on this shell casing is if it was fired. It's not.
Right. Yeah, they say they claim to use some sort of tools and match it up with some marks in his pistol. I don't know. Again, it's a lot of, according to his own defense counsel, a lot of made-up shit that they're trying to use to forensically tie. That's a very technical term, made-up shit, but they're trying to use to tie his weapon there. So I think the spent casing very, very much has a part of the ritual meaning, or part of the ritual as well.
Sorry to put you on the spot, JJ. It's just, and not to get too personal, but I'm assuming when it starts coming to guns and bullets and stuff like this, you might be a better person to ask about. But yeah, I'm wondering if you see. I'm not understanding. Like I understand, like how if you shoot the bullet, you can kind of get, those carvings or whatever, and you can match it to the gun.
Right.
Now, if you were to go like, can't you pop it out that way? Is that going to cause the bullet? Will that cause the bullet to rub against the inside or no?
Yeah. So the ejection, I see where you're going with this. The ejection port on
I'm
any
just
firearm is
trying
going to leave a mark on when it ejects. But that's what I'm saying. So they call it an unspent shell casing, which again is a weird. That's what at least that was what I read in the court documents before, to the best of my recollection. Because let's say you have a bullet in the chamber and you slide the pistol back or you charge your rifle, that whole bullet's going to pop out. It doesn't just expend the bullet and then the shell casing pops out. You know what I mean? So if it's an unfired bullet. Or if they're claiming that he never fired the gun there that day at the bridge or below the bridge, under the bridge, then I'm confused about the whole shenanigans around this whole casing.
Yeah,
that's what I'm saying.
I was trying to make
maybe sense
of it that way.
And the fact that they're doing all this crazy forensic circus and et cetera. I think it does seem to have and be exhibiting some importance in the ritual. Yeah. But yeah, there should be, in theory, a mark made on it, like you said, Nick, once it ejects from a.
It's an odd caliber. Everybody's heard of a 45.
Yeah, it's getting more popular. It's actually getting more popular. It is an odd caliber. It's getting more popular in like law enforcement. When law enforcement moved from the 9 millimeter, which they claimed didn't have enough stopping power in a lot of departments, they moved to the 40 caliber because no one wants to go back to the 45. That's too much firepower, apparently.
I think even if you looked at the tree Kabbalistic sense, 4 would be like Jupiter, and then like if you were to include Doth, I could be wrong, but like Perez might go with that, and like that would be moving up kind of like towards closer to crossing the abyss,
the bullet abyss, right? Because it was right between them, and if you look at the let's go over
they could have been the pillars,
what they found.
Fuck.
Well, one question here on this, because I'm not sure if I recall off the top of my head, and maybe BD or Lisa knows recall some of these details regarding this gun. So Richard Allen, he turns himself in, like you said, Headless. Immediately following the discovery of these 2 young girls getting murdered, the county sheriff, decided to make an announcement saying, look, if you were at the bridge, in and around the bridge between like 1 p.m. and 3 p.m., we need to know just to rule you out. So doing that, Richard Allen went and told the police, hey, I was there, Granted, that doesn't really profess to his innocence or guilt, but nonetheless, the only reason they had all the information about him being there was his initial witness statement in February 2017. Well, they don't arrest him until October 2022. So not only the suspect sketches is a whole different, set of shenanigans, but the fact that they know the caliber of this pistol. The pistol is allegedly registered to Richard Allen. It took them almost 5 years, right?
Yeah.
Or over 5 years. 5.5 years to determine Richard Allen, who they know was on the scene because he provided his own witness statement within a day of the murders, 2 days of the murder, something like that. And then 5.5 years later, like, oh, we got the guy. We never checked to see if he had a registered 40 caliber pistol. That makes no sense.
Right. And the police department have been very, very tight-lipped this whole time. There were other suspects that they did raids on their house, and nothing came of it. So if you're interested in listening to the podcast that basically goes over all this stuff, it was a CNN podcast called Down the Hill. So in one of the particular things about this case was the fact that they got audio and video snippets of this murderer, what they believe to be this murderer, right? And it was so short that the audio could not really be tracked to anybody. But we don't know if the police have more, because they just released one part, they let it sit for a while, and then months later they released the second part. So either there's some kind of tampering, right?
Yeah, 2 years later.
And so
there's a lot of tampering with the evidence.
Have you listened to the audio, Headless and JJ?
Yes,
it doesn't even
very
match.
Muffled.
The two short phrases that are placed together, they don't even match, and I don't even. You can just tell right away they don't even match each other.
Yeah, and by law enforcement's own admission, they've done a lot of editing and enhancements, of that audio. So who knows what that means, really? I mean, I question a lot of the evidence in this case, just like I question a lot of the law enforcement actions in this case, because as you pointed out, they have this video snapshot that originally released in February, I believe maybe February, March. It was February 2017. The initial bridge guy, the one that everyone calls bridge guy with the blue coat, the Snapchat photo.
Sometimes I wonder if that's a whole thing just to mindfuck people, that video. I question that video. That's a good point,
because look what they did with it. Look what so law enforcement for 2 years was saying this is our guy, and then in April of 2019 they said we have a whole new suspect sketch. The first suspect sketch is a totally different person and no longer a person of interest.
Which is exactly what happened with Gilgo, by the way.
That's a good point too. Yeah. So it definitely seems like a mind fuck, in that regard. Because why would they be doing that, right? What is law? It's like they can't be like, oh, well, we just got tricked. First of all, there's a significant difference. I mean, they recognize these are two different suspects. There's a significant difference in between, what that bridge guy looks like, who they claimed was the murderer, versus suspect number 2, which is what the position was that he was the murderer until they arrested Richard Allen, who looks nothing like suspect sketch 1 or suspect sketch 2.
Right. Significantly shorter than the guy in the video too.
Seems that way, yeah. I mean, it looks. So it's interesting you mentioned the other suspects, because to me, the guy and the bridge guy looks a lot like suspect number 2, which was the guy that kidnapped the 9-year-old over there in Lafayette, Indiana, and got busted for that. And then, suddenly he's being looked at for that. Suddenly he's officially being looked at for the murders of Abby and Libby. But that guy looks a lot like suspect sketch number 1. And he was not in prison, and he's a violent child offender, kid diddler, confirmed. That other incident, he had a 9-year-old. When the police came there, he was the guy that had the 9-year-old locked up in his basement, and was just like, come on in. That's how the story goes, but seems like an odd action to do if you have a 9-year-old locked in your basement. But I'm also not a violent kid diddler, so maybe they're not thinking logically at that point and telling the cops, come on in. I have no idea, but my point being, that dude seems like a great suspect, for the first suspect sketch. And I think law enforcement, they probably, given the amount of time that transpired past that guy before they started focusing on other people, be it the suspect sketch number 2 or Richard Allen, I think they probably thought that their investigation probably indicated that guy had something to do with it, Because again, the other part of the investigation that they don't seem to indicate. So you mentioned they did arrest Richard Allen, and they insinuated there was additional suspects. Their investigation, their own investigation documents yield the same conclusion. It's because they're looking for the driver of a car that was left on a nearby road in the immediate aftermath of the presumptive murder time, and saying that you're looking for the driver of the car insinuates that there's more than one person in that car, and if he's leaving that car there, he didn't walk. So if not, then he had someone else come pick him up. So it implies at least accomplices in the matter. So there definitely seems to be other suspects for sure.
I did want to get to, if you don't mind, because I know we kind of did most of the basic information. I do have here that BD did. She made a birth chart on the day, and I would like to hear what she got out of it, because I have had her on my show. It hasn't come out yet, maybe some of them, but she is into the birth charts with true crime, and in my opinion, there has been some that she's done where it's like, yo, that is wild. It very much matches what happened. Right. So I'm interested, and she made a chart. So here we go. It's your turn if you want.
Okay, sure. Let me just generally explain that. In astrology, most people are familiar with what we call a birth chart, which is cast for the moment a baby is born. And that sets forth the life potential of throughout the life of the individual. But we can do these kinds of charts for just about anything. And when we do them not for human birth, but for an event, it's called an event astrology or electional astrology, where you can choose a time which is very lucky for something to take place. In a true crime, what I discovered several years ago was that you can cast this event chart for the time of a crime, and it is remarkable how much information it will convey. It will tell you about the crime. It will tell you about the victim, the perpetrator. And the reason for this is that this chart is actually a snapshot of the heavens, of the positions of the sun, moon, all the planets, the stars. And they all convey a particular energy. And when combined across the geometry of the chart, they have various meanings. They help each other, they interfere with each other, they rely on each other. And so they represent literally hundreds of things. They represent people, places, colors, objects, countries. It's phenomenal how much information you can get. So what happens is when you cast a chart for a crime, you're looking at the landscape of that area of the crime. You're looking at the victim, the status, and also the perpetrator. So if that's clear to everybody, I could just go ahead and start describing. I chose 2:07 p.m. on February 13th, 2017, because that was the time that Libby took the picture of Abby crossing the Manon Bridge. And after that, all hell broke loose because the guy came or whatever happened, and they recorded him supposedly. But 2:07 p.m. I'm very happy with, because at that time, the significator for the two girls, which is the victim significator, is in a house that represents a bridge. It's in the third house. The third house represents bridges. So they're on the bridge at 2:07 p.m. And as I'm starting to get a lot of lately, it's a very unfortunate placement for the victim. It's the last degree of the sign of Virgo, which is pretty destructive. The last degree of a sign is the end. And what's really sad here is that the moon was going to pass from Virgo into Libra within 2 hours, within maybe an hour and 40 minutes. They were supposed to get a ride home at 3:15. That's only an hour and 8 minutes after this chart was cast, and they were already dead by then. So that significator for the victims is telling me they were killed quickly. It's the sign of Virgo. The point of the crime was to desecrate virgin girls, young virgin girls. And it was intended to be extremely brutal and violent.
Yeah, I thought it was maybe
one of the motives,
symbolizing like maiden slaughters in a sense too. Like
yeah, well, they were desecrated. It was deliberate. And what was behind this, I believe, is a configuration of planets that suggest some kind of dysfunctional sexuality. It was a sexual desecration. The perpetrator or perpetrators were sexually dysfunctional, and that was also the point of it. And it had possibly something to do with an internet presence of a boyfriend. I don't want to go into analyzing all the specifics of that. I'm just telling you the results of what I found. Okay. So there's a suggestion of a boyfriend in here, or some young male, possibly a decoy. I don't know if it's the Anthony Shots guy or whatever it is, but there was great anger and rage behind this, and they wanted to express it on the bodies of these girls, and they did just that. Now, the thing going over to the side that rules the perpetrator, this was a little bit buggy for me. Usually I get a real good handle on the type of perpetrator. What is he like? What does he do? In this case, if I have to define the perpetrator the way it's presented to me here, I would say it's the devil. And I'm saying that because of the position of the planet Pluto in the sign of Capricorn, in a very damaging degree of Capricorn. So that's telling me, if I'm going to draw on all the symbols of all these different signs and planets, to me it's looking like Nazi, because that's what it rules. It's that kind of a vibe.
Well, you remember what I was saying?
It doesn't point me in the direction of...
Sorry. I didn't want to interrupt you. Remember what I was saying earlier?
No, it's okay.
Prior to the show, how I was even saying, I think if you want to take white supremacy, that might actually just be occultism and is maybe in appearance looks that way. I said I do think it would go along with sort of Nazism in the occult sense, where it'd be very destructive power. And just to add to that real quick, I even noticed it on here. It said you put 207. Now that would be the top and the bottom of the right pillar. Again, I always say that is more beast-like. That's more of like raw electricity at that point when it is separated from the left side. So like that is very interesting to me.
Yeah, and I'm really confident in the 207 because of where the moon is at 29 Virgo. It pops out of the sign. The girls are killed at that moment because it's a very violent position. It represents virgins, virginal young girls, sacrificed, if you will. But as for the perpetrator, I kept getting back to a group. I'm not getting Richard Allen's kind of description, or Keegan, whatever the other guy is, or the other people. There is a group that is not quite as cohesive as you would want to think. They're splintering. In fact, right now they're pretty much fracturing and getting the hell out of Dodge. This group is white supremacist all the way. They are into pagan sacrifice. I've got paganism all over here. The religious significance is strong, and it's two types. One type of religion is Neptune, and that's paganism. That's ancient. That's going way back. The other is organized religion, and that would be the Jupiter Sagittarius part. It is not that. The Jupiter part relates to ineffective and delayed dysfunctional law enforcement. That's how they fit into that. And this group, as I said, they're splintering. They did not all agree on this course of action. Like I said, it was motivated by rage.
I could see how the dysfunction and like you said, like the police. As crazy as it sounds, I know this is like, just humor me though. But me saying the whole thing of them separating from I do think in magic in a sense is the right pillar becoming free from the form that the left pillar puts it into, and well,
because they didn't all agree on this. They didn't all want to do this. So there's your chasm right there.
Yeah, I forgot where I was
and then
going
when
with
names
that.
start getting put in, and
I forgot where I was going with that. I was going to say something else, but I do again see a lot of how I guess white supremacy could be symbolized in this, especially with the numbers and stuff. In a sense, in the magical sense.
Well, the thing that now see, I did this a long time ago, and then I didn't do anything with it, and then I came back to it just recently, and I thought, I did not look at the birth data for the two girls. Let me look at that, and that was, I'm telling you, the earth opened up under me when I did that.
That's what I wanted to say. That's what I wanted to say real quick. I just remembered.
Go ahead.
The two girls being killed, I do think, in a sense, could show the slaying of the feminine energy. You didn't actually create. You didn't create with it in the physical sense. You kind of unfucked yourself in a sense, so you killed. It's hard to explain, but I could see that the two slain girls that were probably were virgins, were now they've never had physical sex in this realm, and they were slayed, or it's slicing open the veils, removal of the feminine bond on that energy. In a sense like that.
Well, Manon High Bridge is 888 in English gematria. So again, this goes back. This was a place of power. That's why it was chosen.
I mean, you even had 88 was being used with the Nazis.
I like the inept law enforcement investigation there, BD. That's a very accurate description of what's going on here.
That was another thing that I was
going
to say.
It's clear as day in here. I mean, just forget about them. But
that was
what
the
I
thing.
wanted to say about the girls' birth dates. I first was when I heard about this Odinist angle, and my first skeptical reaction I always get is, "Oh, come on, somebody's misinforming." Or so then I went to look at the girls' birth dates. Now this convinced me beyond any question. This is freakish. The odds of this happening are so freakish. but Libby was born on December 27th, 2002. That is a high holy day of St. John the Evangelist in Scottish Rite Freemasonry. Abby, on the other hand, is born June 24th, 2003. That is a high holy day of St. John the Baptist in Scottish Rite Freemasonry. What are the odds that two girls, first of all, are going to be born on those days, and they're going to be best friends, and then they're going to be murdered? It's absolutely astronomical, and yet those are very, very significant dates for Scottish Rite Freemasonry, because that's what they believe in. They don't really believe in the Christ. They believe in the St. John, the Baptist, the Evangelist. And so when I saw that, I thought, oh my God, this is definitely an occult rite, paganistic rite of sacrifice, of destruction of the feminine principle, because that's all they want to do. They did that with Richard Speck and the 8 Nurses. That was destruction of the feminine, caretaking, nurturing women. And I know I carry that into every case because it's so close to my heart. But that is what's going on with these rites and these sacrifices, these sacrificial murders. They're destroying the feminine energy, which they despise.
Yes, that was what I just remember now, too, the whole thing that really got me going with that, where I totally had a brain fart and forgot everything that I was going to say. The whole dysfunctional law enforcement. Again, I was getting at, slaying the girls and removal of the left pillar, moving over to the right, solely on the right. Now, if you're down the middle pillar where you should be, which is balance, you would have the red and the blue next to you as you go up the tree, just like law enforcement cars, the red and the blue. But now, if you're all the way over to one side, you've got the blue and no red. So, in a sense, I can see that's dysfunctional law enforcement, because now both colors ain't there that are supposed to. That's the power and the glory on the tree of life. And in a sense, that is kind of like, you have to get past that to cross the abyss. That's, the law.
to put in something a little bit... Go ahead.
I'm just going to interject this because I will forget. Just real quick on the Tree of Life point is that, so Libby was naked, which to me represented Eve in the garden. Abby was clothed, which represented Eve outside of the garden. And that the whole Tree of Life thing was that when Libby was reaching out with her left hand touching the tree.
Oh, see, I could see the brass. The brass
right?
I could see now being the separation from the abyss to the flesh.
So
the spirit.
Separation of the naked Eve and the clothed Eve. To me, that's how it hit me.
Ooh.
Yeah.
That's interesting.
Yeah.
Right.
Sorry,
I was going to say, when it comes to sacrifice within Odinic cultures, it was done in maintenance of the society. Right. So a lot of it would have to do with sacrificing the elderly so that the young could continue to prosper. It had to do with sacrificing one so that many could prosper. And if this is related to the Freemasons, I could see that relationship right there. This is sort of like the maintenance that they were trying to do. And again, that would go back to the disagreements within the group, because they might not have wanted to do this necessarily. But if you look on a map, the placement between Indianapolis and Chicago seems significant to me, because this could be a route that they do human trafficking on. There's been a lot of different cases going back to Iowa and several other, human trafficking events where it's between the main hubs, right? And so this is one of those places that is between the hubs. So
BD.
Oh yeah, Chicago's so dirty anyway. It's unbelievable what goes on there.
Sorry, I don't know if I interrupted you, BD, but were you done with the chart and everything, or did you have more to go on?
Let me just check.
Because I didn't know, I might have interrupted you there. I'm sorry.
Just take a quick look. I did have a couple of.
May I add something to your statement, Sarah, BD?
Sure.
What I found intriguing on your analysis you provided thus far here on the chart was you mentioned that you had some reading of a boyfriend who might have been used as a decoy. I think that's interesting, because apparently one of these Odinist characters that kind of looks like one of the suspect sketches, and involved himself in, locally with, being a character in the case in this ongoing saga of the town. His son was apparently friends with one of the victims, and he was, a very outspoken Odinist.
Right. That's what I thought I'd heard that too. And I thought I saw that in here because I saw like a boyfriend, girlfriend setup, internet, and connection to a father figure. And I believe I heard somewhere that somebody didn't like Abby wanting to be with his son, or I don't remember, I'm not exactly clear on it, but I did get the vibe from this chart that was what was a little part of the impetus to doing this.
No, it certainly seems plausible, yeah. And there are some circumstantial evidence to support such a claim, yeah.
Right, right.
I think that's an interesting aspect of your chart there for sure.
Right, and I don't think Richard Allen has any connections. And I think that's why he was targeted. He had no connections. He was just a clerk. And they're like, well, this is the guy because he's got nothing else to do with them. Yeah, let's get into the rune.
He was convenient too, right? Because he had produced himself being at the scene. He witnessed seeing 3 girls near the bridge, so they had him already in proximity at the proper time and geographical location to be the culprit of this crime or these murders. However, yeah, I don't think for a second Richard Allen has anything to do with any of it.
And you get a lot of scapegoating in these kind of crimes. You get scapegoating and sacrificing, and it's the same thing. Scapegoat is a sacrifice of sorts.
No, for sure.
They just keep turning up over and over again. Yeah.
So the Hanged Man is very significant because this is how Odin actually received the runes, is by hanging from this tree for several years, right? And so having the Hanged Man associated with this rune, and this rune being painted in blood on the tree that she was touching, indicates a high probability of a ritualistic killing that the police are completely ignoring. Completely. They won't even mention it. The court won't even mention it. What my chart is suggesting is that part of the cops are into this type of a group. There's a mixture of personalities in and out of this group, so that they're basically at war with each other. There's a lot of inner turmoil.
Oh,
so yeah, cops, I could see that for sure. I could see for sure law enforcement participation. Yes. And what's funny on the tip about the maintenance ritual is that the head detective continually talks about how this is going to bring our community together in the end. And it's like, that is very interesting that he would keep saying over and over again, this will ultimately bring our community back together. And it's like, that's odd. This has nothing to do with the rest of the community. No. Right. Nope. You got to find the killer. That's what brings everybody together, not the killing, And he's not finding the killer. So what's going on with that? Very simple logic dictates that there's something else going on. So do you want to talk a little bit about the Tree of Life reference there, Lisa?
I do. Real quick, wasn't Abby positioned in somewhat of a... she wasn't hung, but she had her leg tucked into herself. Her leg was tucked, yeah. Yes. So it was kind of like a hanged man situation, just not, upside down. And to me, that kind of like reminded me of maybe flipping her name. Of course, this might be a stretch. So her initials are AW, and I was thinking AM as flipping the W to an M, and that would pretty much kind of give you the Axis Mundi type, on itself. But in terms of the Tree of Life, like Headless, you mentioned, so correct me if I'm wrong, because I'm not fluent on Odinism at all. But the actual Tree of Life, it's Yardasil, right?
Yes, they do have their own. They do have their own as well. Yes, that is true.
It's called Yggdrasil.
Yeah.
Yggdrasil.
I believe. Okay. And Yggdrasil is very, very close to Yardasil.
That is actually something I totally forgot. The tree is designed differently, I think.
Right. So Yggdrasil is the whole. So what got me on that was that there's a vaccine called Gardasil, and Gardasil was a vaccine produced by Merck for the HPV strains 6, 11, 16, and 18 that have been known to cause cervical cancer. And it was first developed in Australia, I believe, for girls between the ages of 9 and 13. And it kind of struck home because Abby was 13. And so the significance of this vaccine, one, that Gardasil sounds like the tree of life for Odinism. But the other thing that stuck out with the HP vaccine is that they actually the studies that was used in order to provide the data for the HP vaccine is called the Delphi technique. And it was named after the Oracle of Delphi. It was produced during the Cold War, this actual technique. And what it does is it forecasts decisions. And so it assumes a group decisions, like would they be more likely to take the vaccine and what have you, right? But the technique itself was pushed onto this vaccine because it would serve as a way to predict the markets in specific areas of sci-tech and public health for policy making. Okay, that was another one. So, go ahead.
With the Delphi technique, that's a technique they use in group settings, often with product analysis. So what they'll do is you'll have the moderator engage in certain techniques that will lead questions in a certain direction. So if they want things to go well, they'll have certain ways of asking questions that will get people to answer in the affirmative, right? And so they'll keep asking again and again and again until they get the majority of the group in the affirmative camp. Right. And this was my dad and I went to a Obama re-election thing where they were trying to get volunteers from the community, and they were using the Delphi technique to try and get as many people into volunteering for it as possible. We were just there, seeing how they were going to do it, but we knew that the Delphi technique was going to be used. But it's so interesting that Delphi, Gardasil, the ages all match up to the sacrifice. I think it's probably like a pre-existing sort of like a base level, right? So having Delphi associated with, the sacrifice of girls, and these girls are still dying from Gardasil. Gardasil is still killing girls. That's not
absolutely. The pulmonary embolisms as being one of the most horrible side effects of the vaccine itself. But I believe the Delphi technique was one of the first times that it was actually applied to a vaccine. Correct? If I'm not mistaken.
Well, so again, it's unethical to use it.
No, 100%.
It's most associated.
Right. But the fact that it was applied to an actual vaccine was one of those things that was like, wait, why are they using this towards an actual vaccine that is supposedly to help with cervical cancer? One more thing. So based off of that as well, there was also a software that was developed specifically for this whole product called the Delphi Screener software. And it was used to simulate and estimate the natural history of cervical cancer screening in a hypothetical population, specifically for HPV vaccine. So Delphi Screener developed in the Netherlands. That made me think of Odinism. And then it's out of a company called Delphi Biosciences. Who introduced it was the World Health Organization. So that was a big thing. And then the fact that the people in this community use the Tree of Life as their symbol of remembrance for the two girls, going back to the whole Gardasil, Yggdrasil, and what have you. And then the other thing was that the tree, correct me if I'm wrong, Headless, the tree that is in Odinism also represents Odin's horse. Correct me if I'm wrong.
So yeah, Odin's horse is the 8-legged horse, right? And I think that goes back to the 888 of Manan High Bridge. But I can't remember the mythology of the horse right now at this time. But I know that there is a snake wrapped around the tree. That is always in a constant battle, and this is how the final battle gets sparked off is fighting against this snake that's wrapped around the tree. And that's what finally does Thor in, is Thor, I think Thor is eaten by this snake. But
Well,
I'd
and
have to
this
go
may
back
be
and check
completely
that.
loose tangent, but I thought Tree of Life in the Kabbalah and then Tree of Life in Odin. And with Kabbalah, you can use it as Cabal, which is Kabbalah, which in Portuguese means horse. And I thought, oh, wow, horse, tree, what have you. And that Kabbalah in Portuguese is meant as a bringer of news, which the Knights Templar used to bring in new news to an area. So, yeah.
I think it's
That's kinda
interesting
what
that you mentioned, because I think I have seen photos of it. Like people like raising money or like selling shirts or whatever, like they're putting actually that symbol is
Yes.
on some of it. I
Yes.
totally forgot about that. That is actually weird. If you go through looking social media and stuff, they got that symbol on the shit.
So whether
Right.
whether it's staged or real or not, this is the images that they're putting forward. They want
Right.
people to know them.
So in small towns, we had a little girl die up here in Chippewa Falls. She was murdered by her cousin who attempted to rape her. And the entire Chippewa Falls area all got in on it, putting purple ribbons around all of their trees, around out front, because supposedly purple was her favorite color. So having the entire small town go ahead and put symbols or put colors or put ribbons around things as part of a ritual is incredibly easy if you're doing it from a position of authority. They're all going to go ahead and do that, you know? So something to keep in mind. They know what they're doing when it comes to this stuff.
I think so too. That was
I
all
have a
got.
comment about Gardasil. Oh,
Go ahead.
that regarding the Gardasil, I worked at Merck in the 90s, and I seem to recall that they passed a law in Texas requiring that vaccine to be given to adolescent girls. Louise, are you
Yes.
familiar with
Yes,
that
I am.
at all?
It
Yeah, I
was-
remember when they did that.
The propaganda
Yeah.
was pretty thick in the commercials and so forth, and I believe
Mm-hmm.
the governor at the time was Rick Perry, who went on to serve as the Department of Energy guy later. And then, but yeah, it was a huge push, and there were certain people that were against it because of all the information that was coming out
Right.
of India with the pulmonary embolisms. And there were people that were on board with it. And again, it was here going back to the whole virginity, virgin, feminine energy. They were saying, why are you wanting to vaccinate girls that aren't even of sexual maturity yet? Why even
Right.
impose this upon them? And they were even making it to the point to where you couldn't even go to school unless you were vaccinated
Oh wow.
with this.
Yeah.
I was older, that I was beyond 9 years old, but I believe it lasted for only a while, and then it got knocked down completely because of the side effects. Because they were also wanting to do it to boys as well.
I remember that.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right, the
That's
big
just a
push
really
now
weird
is that
thing.
Gardasil wants all little boys and all little girls vaccinated with
Correct.
this, and there's just no evidence whatsoever to show that this has any effect in the positive
Correct.
on little boys
Some weird stuff.
at all. So,
So you
it's
just real quick,
total
HPV is like 200 strains of a virus, and it's only 4 of them that have been potentially known to cause cancer. And so, yeah, it's potentially, and more than likely, your immune system just takes care of it on its own. But if you get one of the strains, it's said too that this is the first time we see, well, if you believe in all this, it's the first time we see that an actual virus is responsible for cancer causing of a specific tissue.
well, we've also got the cancer-causing viruses that they put into the polio vaccine.
Yes, exactly. Yes.
Oh gosh.
Yeah. But anyway,
Same group.
Same
This
lab.
is like a really weird connection, though, I have to
Yep.
say. Yeah. Was there
But-
anything else you wanted to mention about like the runes and stuff? Like I even know. Oh, that's right. I do have more for with the victims and stuff. JJ Vance said this to us prior to
Right.
going on. We even do get this symbolism that's kind of like
There's the victim touching the tree too. Yeah.
Wow.
And
yeah,
that
they had
rune
this-
that you just showed, that was drawn on the tree. BDU had a little bit more information about that rune. If you could go over that, that would be helpful too.
That rune, the Ansas, is supposedly the first in that series, and it represents truth and clarification. So, go figure. And in their warped way of wanting to interpret this as an improvement, I guess that's why they put that there. But I don't know. It doesn't fit in my mind at all. But that's what I found when I was researching it. The first one in the series for truth and clarification.
Right. Well, I think what they're trying to clarify is, again, he keeps talking about community. What they're trying to do is clarify the purpose, get everybody on the same page, get them all moving in the same direction. And in terms of using this Richard Allen guy as the scapegoat, that, you know, they're really hoping that his sacrifice is going to get everybody back into the community, right? The sheeple. They want them back into the sheeple. So, and they've ruined their credibility in town. They've ruined their credibility with, you know, other law enforcement agencies. Everybody looks at this botched job and they're all thinking, why didn't you pay any attention to the symbols that are all over this thing? And, you know, no answers, you know. Again,
that's a great point, though, because if I may interject there, Headless, that's a great point, because it seems like, to speak to the political influence and power that have improperly weighed upon themselves in the situation, the on-the-ground investigators in the case seem to have concluded it was an occult ritual murder. It was their bosses that shut it down, including folks like the sheriff, who as recently as August was claiming Odinism. There's no Odinism, you know, and claiming not to know this Purdue professor. They shut it down, the investigatory documents, by saying, look, we found this Purdue University professor who said no Odinism here, and then that's how they shut it down. And turns out that's not really the case once all this stuff got released.
Right, they actually destroyed evidence. So as the site was closed off, they let the waters come up and just wash away any of the evidence that they didn't find convenient. So they were focused only on this shell casing, unspent shell casing, which the entire case is hinging on, instead of the stab wounds and the ritual and the blood on the tree. Right?
Yeah,
it's like it
sure.
couldn't be any more obvious at this point. And if you look at the rune itself, I could kind of see maybe somebody wiping a knife off on a tree, but you'd be a lot better off wiping it off on the ground. And it could make that shape, but it's hard to really come up with that. I think that was very deliberately placed. I mean, I don't think there's any other explanation for it, you know?
Yeah, it certainly seems that way.
And this Menon High Bridge is a place of power, and I think anybody who would be participating in this ritualization would know that that's a place of power for this entire community. So, you know, I mean, Trestle Bridge over that high of a gap is gonna gain a lot of attention.
Yeah, I mean, there was a lot of folks there that day from the town that were in and around that park and the bridge that day. So even on a cool day in February, it's still a hot spot of town activity.
See,
That's go ahead.
That's even another thing. I mean, I just think, you know, we're talking about the bridge, and I keep forgetting to bring it up. I mean, that itself is symbolic, you know, of connecting 2 points, or like, you know, like the arch, like, you know, if you think of a bridge, that could even be like, you know, the arch to the pillars and stuff. You know, it's just very interesting how, like, you know, you have them separated with a piece of brass, and you have a bridge nearby. It's just, to me, it's very symbolic.
When you say Arch of the Pillars, I think of cancer.
Yes,
and how the vaccine was for cancer.
Oh, interesting.
Because they
I
had
was
the
also
cancer
thinking-
keystone.
The 213 really reminds me a lot of Janus. Janus, right? And so you've got the arches. Janus is the god of the arches. The 2 13-year-olds, the way that they were set up, with one touching the tree and the other one sort of off at an angle, it sort of has that whole Janus effect right there.
I was even thinking of that rune looking like a key, in a sense.
Oh, yeah, sure.
You know,
Yep.
Janus. I mean, even the bridge. I mean, I know there's different variations of the hangman. Maybe this is a perfect one. But, I mean, that bridge was basically just like a flat wooden road thing to walk across. I mean, even that hanged man card looks like, I mean, somebody was hanging off the side of that bridge.
Right. If you look at the Tau at the top of the hangman card, that could be a, trestle bridge, too.
That's,
Yeah.
It's just very interesting, Oh, and Occult Paramatorium even said Janus a form of Hern 2, the horn, the bone, and he was referencing that Hern before with the hangman card. So, could there be something there? Very interesting. And then we'll go on to, I don't know if you guys wanted to have anything to say about these.
Well, the 4 or the symbol over to the right looks like kind of the basics of the symbol for Jupiter, right? So you've got that long stem and then sort of the 4 that it creates. That's the astrological Jupiter right there.
You know what I find interesting with, and I think I was talking about it with Lisa yesterday. That almost reminds me of an asterisk that's on Abby. And that would be like a K that's flipped back and forth in a sense. And the asterisk, I always refer to the 8th sphere being for Tahuti or Toth, and that's where the magic starts if you jump up the tree. The asterisk is on even the 8th key. So I do find it that all interesting in a sense, with the way I look at it.
I definitely see this the hangman card though within the configuration Abby's body was left in with the leg there. I see what you're saying.
I mean, that even could be like reflection of the eyeball lens too that's being shown there, which would be like kind of both. I would say that's Janus because you're playing both sides of the lens in a sense. I don't know.
Right. Yeah. It's kind of a reflection. So also to go over a little bit of what the judge is doing. So the judge tried to dismiss the 2 lawyers who kept bringing this stuff up.
Right.
That is constant. So I think this is something that a lot of people should be aware of. If you do have lawyers that are doing their job, which is very rare, the judge might just try to get rid of them in your case.
Yes.
Just so that she doesn't have to, put up with an actual defense. They don't want actual defenses anymore. Judges nowadays, especially in corrupt places like Indiana, are going to try and make everything as smooth as possible for the prosecution. And if they got to get rid of your defense attorneys to do so, they'll do that. So people need to keep that in mind. If your judges or if your lawyers are doing their job, it's not going to please the judge. They're not going to go out to dinner together like most judges and lawyers end up doing. If you've got a lawyer that is on good terms with the judge, get rid of them. Get rid of them immediately.
That's some great advice, actually. Yeah, as a former PI myself, not in Indiana but in Ohio, I recognize that as being some sound advice.
Not legal advice. Not legal advice.
No, but not nonetheless sound advice.
Right.
All right.
Well, I think it's important to note also in the Delphi case that the judge was actually appointed by the Indiana Supreme Court. So the initial judge recused himself immediately, and then this judge was appointed by the Indiana Supreme Court to oversee this case. So, in and of it, I mean, right off rip, they already have the state's highest political structures weighing heavily in this case, and I think that's indicative of what's really going on behind the scenes when the judge is like, you bring up that damn Odinism stuff one more time and you're out of here, buddy. That's basically what went down because, there was some closed quarters, in the judges, quarters, that conversation. So no one really knows what went on, but that's certainly how it appears it went down.
Right. And Fort Wayne is notoriously connected with mob activity, right? So Fort Wayne is highly connected with organized crime. From the mayor to everybody else, they're all in on it. There's so many different Cosa Nostra type families that actually live out there, and you wouldn't expect it. It's a small town in Indiana, but that's the perfect cover, So Fort Wayne itself is a hive of corruption. And it goes all the way back to Mad Anthony Wayne. If you go back to the history of Fort Wayne, it's just a terrible shit show.
A member of the Society of Cincinnati, Mad Anthony Wayne.
There you go. Yeah, he killed so many people. Just, I mean, why do they call him Mad Anthony Wayne, you know?
Yeah.
The guy was just a slaughterer.
And then here is that sigil on the right. I guess, well, that's, again, when we were talking about how we thought that might have been drawn on the tree. I think that's the way they're even showing it to us anyway. So that is a little
Right, so
questionable.
that's the blood spatter.
Yeah,
Right.
interesting.
And now, did they ever find the knife? I don't think I ever saw anything about the actual murder weapon itself.
No, it's a shortfall in their investigation, whatever they want to call an investigation.
Right.
Now I know maybe we might have like kind of touched on it a few times. I think we might have talked about it prior because it was something that I noticed. You know, I don't know much about this case, believe it or not, but everybody else here knows more than me, so I figured we could make it happen. When I was going to make the thumbnail, I was like, yo, how many different people were they like showing for like this case?
Yeah.
I was like, how many mugshots did they saying like, oh, this is the new suspect? I'm like,
It's a
this
carnival
is
of creepsters.
fucking crazy to begin with. So like, how many? What was it? Like 3 or 4?
Yeah.
At least.
Stop.
Do you happen to know, like, any of you happen to know, like, maybe, like, the timeline of these people? And, like, and the reasons for, like, the change and everything?
Well, that's the thing.
Yeah.
The cops won't say.
Yeah, they won't. They're not releasing why things are shifting, but I do have an understanding of the timeline of these various, characters.
Awesome,
One of
yeah.
which just got sentenced just a few months ago.
For something
Keegan
else?
Kline. Yeah, he was. So every one of these characters is a kid diddler. Go figure, right? So they had the one guy over in Lafayette who had the 9-year-old locked up in his basement. He was an early suspect in the case a few years ago, and he actually he's back in prison, I believe, as well now since then, and violent, as a result of this 9-year-old abduction and sexual assault. And then the second guy, he apparently the BD, you said the social media account earlier. I can't recall the name of that social media account where the kid diddler from Fort Wayne was posing as a young girl or young kid to get to basically engage in kid diddler activities with one of the victims. Do you remember the name of the social media account? You had mentioned it earlier.
Yeah, I didn't know the name of it either. I do not.
Oh, okay.
No, I don't. I didn't know it. But I know I mentioned an internet platform without knowing what name, specifically.
There you
It was
go.
one of
Maybe
those,
that's
I
what stuck
don't
in
know,
my head. Right.
Tinder, that kind of thing. Yeah, no. No, I think I would have remembered it, but I don't think I ever knew it.
Yeah, I can't recall
Just
it
something
either.
online like I think it might have been Facebook for all I know that they were connected. Yeah.
Yeah, it was one of the social media platforms. But so that guy Keegan Kline, he just got sentenced, so he's back in prison. He was another one of the suspects, and again, he had communication.
Oh, good.
They had a record of him having communications with one of the victims through this solicitation of nude photographs of children. Apparently, was his shtick.
Right.
And then there was the other fella,
Yeah.
which they whose farm they raided, and they threw him in jail, and he had some connections to some of these kind of characters, these unscrupulous characters, and so none of these people are Richard Allen. Richard Allen doesn't fit the same profile of having, at least doesn't seem to have the same profile of activity as some of these other characters do, abducting 9-year-olds and stuff like that. The guy had a job at CVS, and seemed to be a upstanding citizen amongst his community. But yeah, it seems odd that they would have all these different suspects and all these different mugshots, right? I mean, it seems like
Right, but they
this is
seem
also
to
sort
have
of
no
distraction.
lack of guys. Yeah, they have all these guys doing other stuff.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I mean, it's an odd
They have no lack of
investigation.
suitable candidates for pervy behavior. I mean, it's just like a parade of musical chairs of
Right,
these
right.
creeps that are, obviously guilty of some infractions. Yeah. So
They
have
probably
an
did something, but not
embarrassment
this.
kind of thing. So they just
Then-
parade them before us and pick one, pick
Right.
a card, any card. He'll be guilty of something filthy.
Right.
Yeah, and it's certainly possible that none of these other earlier suspects, or they couldn't stick the case on these people, right? Because they had other alibis. They were known to be somewhere else during the time of the murders, right? And again, that goes back to Richard Allen, why presumably he was trying to be an upstanding citizen,
Right.
and reporting to law enforcement that he was there and he did see some things and was trying to help their investigation.
Right.
But this is why I would always provide such non-legal advice. Again, not legal advice, just like Headless said before, but I would advise people, don't ever talk to police, because those statements can and will be used against you in a court of law, as Richard Allen is finding out right now. So, it's such a really odd investigation. Speaking to the judge's activity, it's never a good sign when the judge has to go hire their own attorney to defend their actions in the case they're overseeing and they're presiding over. So from start to finish, the whole thing just seems like a complete boondoggle that I have to ask, when they're parading all these suspects out there the way they did and changing suspect sketches and flip-flopping stories, is this all part of the show? That's really what I kind of look at it as. Is this all, as Headless was pointing out before, some sort of large scale, ritual?
Well, I think with the guy who had the 9-year-old in the basement, he didn't seem too concerned when the cops showed up. So he might have connections, right?
Right. Yeah,
he might
for sure.
have connections in the police department. That probably wasn't
might
the
have
first
thought it was
time
cool,
the cops
right,
showed
yeah.
up that day.
Or he
Yeah.
knew he wasn't going to get in trouble. Bottom
Yeah.
line, yeah.
A lot of those type of
so a
characters
lot of
are
these-
used as police informants, so they already, when the cops are talking to them, there's already an accepted, channel of communications that they're not going to be guarded, right? So he very well could have not only been involved in some white nationalist Nazi occultism, if you want to call it Odinism or whatever sort of white nationalist group, which again very likely includes not only corrections officers but law enforcement officers. So there may be some other, connecting principle there amongst some of these. The guy who had the 9-year-old in his basement, the other fellow with the social media kid did all their activity. There may be some other connecting principle amongst these people. They may look like varying sectors of the local population, but they all may be connecting through some sort of occult group or some,
Right.
So he may have felt comfortable letting these people in because they may have been an informant, may know these people from the club. You know what I mean? Their little organization. So
Right.
there's certainly a lot of that could go on there, because it does seem very odd that they would. He got a 9-year-old locked up in his basement, and the cops are just like, "Hey, what's going on in the basement?" He's like, "Oh, you guys want to see?" You know what I mean? Because that's kind of how the story went down, as far as how that guy got busted.
He thought that they were in on it too, but maybe they weren't the same group that he was used to dealing with. So
That's certainly
one thing I
possible.
just want to point out too, that the day that this happened was a teacher work day, right?
Oh.
So it wasn't any special holiday, but for some reason on 2/13, they decided to call out of school. There was no snow, obviously. They were all outside playing, This had nothing to do with a snow day. This was a very specific teacher holiday. So there were kids everywhere. This was the day, if there was a murderer looking for targets, this was the day to do it. Perfect weather, and so I don't know how high up or down it goes, but they knew something was open that day, and they waited at this place. I believe they waited at this place for the victims to show up. They did what they needed to do, and they got the hell out of there as quick as possible. They put them in the positions, and then they walked away. So,
And possibly even stole a car, dropped it off on a neighboring road, and that is in the police investigatory documents as well, that there's this other aspect that seemingly now has gone by the wayside, and is like, hey, no one's really concerned about that anymore, even though that seems to infer there
proves
was
the network.
accomplices and exactly, a network and their egress route from the scene and whatnot. So seems to be a lot to that storyline, and I don't think all these people have to be an Odinist cult, like one cult or multiple Odinist cults or cells of a cult. Again, I think it comes down to connecting principles, and in a state like Indiana, where the headquarters of the KKK has been there for decades, white nationalists are not that hard to find.
Right. But again, a white nationalist murder of 2 white kids, it seems odd, right? I mean, KKK especially, they would probably not be interested in killing 2 little white girls. But I think the aspect of they hated the femininity, or they wanted to sacrifice the femininity, going back to the Gardasil and all the rest of that stuff, that starts to make a little bit more sense. They were targeted because of their gender, you know?
No, I'm tracking with you on that. As far as the outlying, what I was referring was there's just because they're gaining support from other areas of political structures within the state of Indiana doesn't mean they all have to be part of an Odinist cult that are the people that are covering this up and providing this whole distraction and improperly, violating Richard Allen's rights and, et cetera, and acting in whatever order of malfeasance. They could just be fellow white nationalists wanting to support fellow white nationalists in their activities. I think it could be that simple. I don't think, because again, as you mentioned before, the whole town there's at least a large contingent of the town seems to be in on it, right? Like, which I would agree with, but I don't think they all necessarily have to be in the same cult. They'll help each other out because they're part of a underground sort of a cult network.
Yeah, especially when it comes to the federal prison system. There's a large federal prison contingent when it comes to white nationalism. Like that's where the gangs are based out of, is the federal prison system, and then it branches out through these different communities. And Indiana has large federal prisons in it. So,
Terre Haute for sure, yeah.
Yeah, I was gonna say that. I've heard of that one actually.
There's a lot of creepy tales from that prison.
So
as far as what they've done to prisoners over the years.
I think there are layers of association that are going on here, and it's the layers of association where all of these signals are getting crossed, right? So maybe the left hand doesn't know what the right hand is doing, or vice versa. The right hand has no idea what the left hand is doing, even though they're part of the same group, same organization.
I'm glad you said that, because I think in certain regard, the judge's actions have only been meant to delay this entire case, because Richard Allen's not pleading guilty, clearly. He's got attorneys that are willing to work for free, regardless of the state's going to pay them or not. They're going to do pro bono, they're saying now. And, I think to a certain regard, the judge was, just delaying this as much as she could, doing whatever she could to delay it. And I think that's why she's gotten some top cover in the process as well, so far at least, because the Supreme Court certainly could have stepped in already, and they're not really too quick to get on this case either. They're like, oh, we'll hear oral arguments in January and we'll get you a decision by March, so it's not a priority. And it should be.
They're just flushing this guy's life down the toilet because they don't want to make any waves. That's just so typical.
And you know what? What is interesting that I did want to add? I don't know how truthful the pictures are with the case, because I hate to say it, but sometimes I get a lot of my true crime actually from YouTube, and that's you have to even worry about that. I mean, it's, that's almost as bad as Instagram truth. I'm almost positive that there has been pictures or cameras proven of like a day, I think, that he claimed that he spoke to these COs or something, or claiming that these COs that were moving him had patches on it, and I'm almost positive that there might be proof of that. But I do know for a fact that I think it has ended up in the court documents, where there is discussions with these COs, and that they do admit that they have these patches, but saying that it's not Odinism, but could have some shared views or something to that effect. I know that's for sure is in the court stuff that they've let out, but do any of you know, or if it's true, that there has actually been footage of the patches on them also? Have any of you heard of that?
I've heard of the patches. I've heard of the patches. Yeah. I've never seen any documentation, but I hear it over and over that their patches have been seen or found or in the court documents.
Yeah, I think the cops actually admit to the patches, yes.
Mm-hmm. They do, yes, yeah. So that's what that was their claim. Like, you guys are misunderstanding these patches, but we'll take them off anyway. And it was always the same two corrections officers, apparently, according to Richard Allen's attorneys. And according to his attorneys in their filings, all of these interactions, when they came to the jail, these two guys would bring him into the interview room with his attorney. And so that would be on videotape. So apparently the fact these guys are wearing the patches, according to the court documents, was videotaped. And again, you're right, they do admit it. They just claim it was, misconstrued.
It's not what you think it is.
You know what's
It never is it?
You know what I thought?
No, it never is.
You know what I thought was really interesting about that, and I'm not making the claim. It's just who knows when you start thinking about like how maybe religious or pagan or whatever kind of idea you want to consider this, spiritual, whatever. I never thought of like maybe if a CO had the same thought as a group that might be in prison as well, maybe they would help them out. But like I was in, I've mentioned this before. I did 2 years in the feds for selling steroids online. It is what it is. And I was at Fort Dix in Jersey, and I ran into. This is the first time I ever heard of Odinists. Actually, is because I ran into them there. And actually, cool motherfuckers. Some of them were just like, kind of like, I just wanted to find a group of good old bullies to hang out with. They showed them their paperwork. They proved they weren't a pedophile or a fucking rat or a snitch. So, like, they kind of were like, oh, yeah, Odin, yeah, whatever. And they just hung out with them. But I will tell you one thing. To come to think about it, those motherfuckers always had tons of cigarettes and drugs.
Really?
And a lot of times that does come in through the COs, especially cell phones.
When it comes to Odinism, it's all about the clan. It's all about the clan. It's these Jarls and these Odinist leaders take care of their own, and so that means the COs, everybody else, are going to be a member of that clan. It's more tightly knit than anything. I think what's going on is that we see a branching of these different religious beliefs used sort of as balkanization methods. So, Christianity is sort of on the decline. And so nobody trusts the Freemason. Nobody trusts any of this stuff. So they've got to keep branching out. I remember Jeffrey Epstein specifically would threaten his victims with voodoo. Now, what the hell does Jeffrey Epstein have to do with voodoo? I mean, other than the fact that he's in the Caribbean, I don't see any connection. I think they all have to have sort of like a basis in ritual magic, some form, for them to get their foot in the door. I think that's part of it, So if it's Odinism, if it's voodoo, whatever it is, you've got to have at least your foot in the door. You've got to have at least 1 foot in ritual magic so that you can play ball with all the rest of the big guys.
I agree with you on that one. And in fact, that's why I think that Jeffrey Epstein used the infinity symbol as a signature.
The magician, or the number 8 again.
Yeah, there you go, too, yeah. In regard to voodoo and Epstein, the Clintons famously went on their honeymoon to a voodoo honeymoon. So, I mean, there may be some validity to some of that voodoo practicing.
She talked about sacrificing a chicken to Moloch. You want to talk about mixing cultures right there.
Yeah, she did.
It's a good point. Yeah, no, I think I like that idea, though, that is like the step 1 into the door is some sort of ritual magic.
So,
in some form or fashion.
Like, do you think that's going to get it's like it almost seems to kind of be entertained. I mean, do you think this stuff is being entertained by the courts and the judge?
Oh, as far as the judge doesn't want any part of any more Odinism talk in her courtroom.
Oh, she doesn't?
I'm confident of that.
Oh, okay.
No. Yeah, it's so unorthodox. Because again, it's so unorthodox for her to. So she can't just. What she did was she fired his attorneys, even though without their compliance with this whole firing. He normally turns to resign. They can't leave until the defendant has Richard Allen in this instance would have a new counsel assigned to him, or that's filed with the court saying, "Hey, I'm representing this guy." Otherwise, the court's already violated his Sixth Amendment constitutional right to counsel. So, as far as what Indiana should be doing, as far as the state, their law enforcement authorities and their court system, the Supreme Court specifically, they should be putting a lid on this because they've already created a mistrial situation in this case. So if they want to bring any justice to the justice for the victims and their families, and to actually prosecute the actual culprits of these murders, they're not going on the right path whatsoever, right now, right? Because they're providing a mistrial for this guy, and then, who knows what they're trying to do within this whole judicial proceedings, because he's from, Fort Wayne, right? Judge Gold's from Fort Wayne, and they're going to be importing all of the jurors from Fort Wayne also. because they wanted to have a change of venue. They're trying to still get a change of judge. They got the change of venue approved by saying we can have a change of venue of sorts. We're going to have the trial here in Carroll County, but we're going to bring the jurors in from another county. So there's already so much going on. Like the fact that the Supreme Court of Indiana was just like, nah, we'll listen to this argument later and we'll get to it later. Like there's no sense of urgency. I don't think that anyone there wants to hear Odinism again. I think these attorneys realized they were in a lot of shit. And that's why in my opinion, they orchestrated the release of those documents in which the attorney's friend and former employee is now been charged with, because that whole story doesn't really check out how that stuff worked out. And, and I can see where these attorneys ran into some roadblocks and would feel like they have to do something like that, given the way the judge and the court system has reacted to them thus far. And what they've done to Richard Allen, I mean, they've abused the shit out of the guy. I mean, he looks like a totally different person now. They had another inmate in April of this year write to the court and say, hey, look, they're abusing this guy. And now the corrections officers have since admitted, yeah, we tased him a couple times. If they're admitting to tasing him 2 times, like how many times are they really tasing him? And what are they tasing him for? Like for what purpose? Because it sounds like that's like, yeah, we're going to admit to this, but we've really been doing it like a whole, much more flagrantly abusing this guy and tasing him, just for fun.
Well, I think they want a confession. They want to get that confession out of him so that they can just put the whole thing behind him, Which again, supposedly they did. Supposedly he did confess over the phone to his wife, but no one's heard the contents of these. This is all still sealed. Whether or not it's a direct confession, whether or not what he's saying, whether or not there's somebody forcing him to say these things over the phone, like one of these Odinist guards, perhaps. You never know. That's what I'm saying. I think that confession could easily be thrown out in legitimate court proceedings. And they're already trying to squash the search warrant to get into his house. And they can't get the search warrant into his house, then they have no case to begin with, because then they would never find this gun that they've tied to the unspent shell casing through these forensic acrobatics. So I mean, again, the whole thing seems wild. But yeah, trees.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, there's nothing has been fruitful in this investigation thus far.
Right.
And no one wants to hear Odinism. So if it's not an Odinism cult, like it's weird to me that that the term Odinism has struck such a nerve. Right.
It's so bizarre and so outside the norm that people are like, what are they talking about? And I think there is an element to it again, but I don't know how deep it goes. I think what it has to do with is the discipline of it, right? So there has to be the discipline of ritual magic. And you can see that the symbolic nature of what's going on involves some kind of a discipline of ritual magic. And if that's the case, it could be Odinism, it could be Freemasonry. It's all having to do with something about the discipline of actually taking a life, That's what it really comes down to, and I think that's where the sacrifice took place.
Sure.
Was there anything else any of you wanted to, really talk about with this case or anything? I'm trying to think if there was anything. I know very little, just stuff that I've watched on YouTube. I'm just trying to think of weird things, and I think I'm out.
No, I think we've covered the long and the short of the judicial misconduct in this case. The one thing I would like to add, though, is, it's not a shock to me to find a ritual murder in mound country. This is heavy mound country of the ancient architecture of America, which I suspect numerous occult groups have focused on these mounds. We recently spoke of Dwight York and his mound affinity down there in Georgia with the Nuwaubian Nation. And I think, speaking of the smiley face killers conversation we had before, I discussed in that one with y'all the Todd Geib case, which I use as the example of the rule, not the exception to the rule. Todd Geib was murdered just north of Lansing, Michigan, in I believe it was 2004, if I remember correctly. So it's been a number of years. So he was murdered on a mound in a town that he grew up in and knew the entire rural area. So a lot of these cities, I get a lot of pushback on my mound theories, especially relative to ritual sacrifice and smiley face killers, because a lot of cities are built on mounds. Chicago, Fort Wayne, Lafayette, as in General Lafayette, Indiana. So a lot of but you go to a place like where Todd Geib's hometown was there in north of Lansing, about an hour 60 or 70 miles, about an hour drive north of Lansing. Well, that's in the middle of nowhere. There's no reason, like, it doesn't really meet the same, large population center. So if you find a smiley face killer victim like Todd Geib in a small, very tiny town where he grew up his entire life, and they claim he got lost and just fell in this pond and died, which, again, none of the details, the forensic evidence, the toxicology, anything supports that. I think that there is groups that commit ritual sacrifices on the sites of these ancient ritual sacrifice sites, the mounds. And I think it's a far more prominent thing than just the smiley face killer cult, as exhibited by the Odinism situation here in Delphi happening. Well, I don't have the definitive proof from any surveys of mounds that site there along the river in Delphi, Indiana, the town started by the Society of Cincinnati, which again is the folks who started America and built all this stuff, started building all these things on mounds. I don't have any definitive proof that is a mound site. However, it's a hotbed of mound country, and it's in the right location of where you'd expect to find a mound along the riverside there. So I think there is a lot of groups that commit these ritual sacrifice murders, not just the smiley face killers. And again, I don't think it ends with Odinism in this case in Delphi either.
We hardly even got into the river, but what the river connects all these different areas, that might have a significant role in who is doing what in this case.
Sure. I think that's a good point, yeah.
I think it's a signature.
Yes.
Very well could be, yep.
Yeah.
Yeah, I just something, I definitely do think these are one of those cases where there is symbolism that's, which I think is used in smiley face killers, even with the water, kind of showing again the crossing to the abyss, or like, the soul leaving the flesh. So like, I do question with this is like, we seeing that with this as well, with some of the stuff that, has been on the crime scene. I even think, before we wrap it up, if I might be correct, I might be wrong, but, correct me if I am. I think it might be maybe the same documentary, maybe that the CNN one, but I know I saw something where I think one of the cops that was at the crime scene did say to them, that in his opinion, the stuff that was there made sense somehow. Like it wasn't
right.
Happen chance.
There were dissenting voices within the investigation that said, I think this was a former prosecutor that they brought in to help investigate, and he said, not everything is being talked about. There are elements of this case that are not going examined. And he was very, very clear about that. He didn't say what they were, but he said that, and then nothing. They didn't acknowledge him any further. Nothing. So
that's a good
point.
Could be
waiting for a significant date.
Yeah, that's a good point you made there, Headless. There was another independent review or audit of this investigation when it kind of stalled out, and it was very odd because it was done by the Georgia Bureau of Investigations, which I have no idea still why they got tasked with it or how that conversation gets started. If anyone's going to audit, I would presume it'd be the FBI, even though, they don't investigate anything. But nonetheless, that would be the agency I would assume would be called in for such an activity.
Did they ever get the name
of Jekyll Island?
Did they ever get the name of the Purdue professor that said it wasn't Odinism?
His name is listed. However, there's been many games played around whether or not that guy even made those comments or anyone even asked him those questions.
Okay.
So, yeah, it's still a question mark, it seems. It seems to me, looking at it, looking from my analysis, like that aspect of it was just to close off what Ellis was just saying, the dissenting opinions. They had needed something to rule that out in the investigatory record. And they'd say, oh, well, we talked to this guy over at Purdue, and he's like, yeah, no Odinism here. So, yeah, I think my suspicion is there was no Purdue professor.
That's kind of where I was going with that. They just said it was.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, I think they're all really skittish because of the case. I forgot his name, but the guy was a Crowley follower who got acquitted. You know who I'm talking about. Like, so they claimed, oh, it's just satanic panic, and then you look back at the evidence and it's like, no. He probably did it. You know what I'm
West
talking
Memphis
about.
3.
He's a big celebrity now.
Yeah, what can I think
Oh
of
yeah,
his
okay.
name?
Now I'm tracking.
Yeah, he's killing it with that monetized YouTube channel.
It's a very well. I mean, honestly, there's a lot of correlation between those crimes, right?
It's true.
Right.
Yeah.
Right, absolutely. And I think you're going to see a lot more of it too. I mean, we see these things move in phases, right? So phase 1 is the serial killer, and we all see that in the, the 1970s. They've got all the serial killers, and then phase 2 is the mass shooters, right? They talk about going postal, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then it goes into, the school shooters, and now we're on
Mall
something
shooters,
different.
theater shooters.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
I think now we're on something different. So they're trying something new out, and I think that this is representative of that. We're going to see a lot more of this, and it's not going to make sense. Nothing is going to make, and they're going to try and ignore all the ritual aspects.
You know what
I think you're probably onto something there.
I think something that's worth being said with what you're saying, Headless. Even if this is ritual aspect stuff to even just put fear into society. Like you're saying, we have school shootings, and now we have this.
Yeah.
The school shootings, if they're all real, it's actually being done in front of, if they're being done in front of people, there is a stage being set at least. With these crimes, though, they're just saying this is what happened. There's no people there to say, yeah, that's what happened.
Right.
Right.
You're even having to provide less proof to the world what you're being seen.
With no cameras. Again, these are all going to be taking place in places with no cameras, like the one you mentioned up in Michigan. No cameras. It's not going to have cameras. That's the key, is to continually have these things take place in the wilderness. And that goes along with so many other agendas, too. Don't go in the woods.
Yeah.
Don't go in the woods. There's
Well, it's
somebody
going to
out there
scare the
waiting
shit
to
out of a
hide.
small town like Delphi, Indiana, or Casanova, Michigan. I assure you, 20 years after the fact, Casanova, Michigan, I was there probably 5 years ago now, but when I went through there, but the people there, they were impacted by that event, even if they didn't know the victim or the victim's family. Small town, rural areas, they're all impacted by these incidents of these horrendous crimes that occur there for no explanation, and again with almost no evidence or publicly available to even substantiate some of the claims being made of what actually occurred. So yeah, that's it. That's a great way to terrorize people. Yeah, for sure.
Well, and then how much of it is generating money? I mean, across the board, whether it's from YouTubers to the actual city itself,
Yes.
because the city
That's a
itself
good
was
point.
really, really small, and apparently the tourism has just ballooned in Delphi. That they've talked about how there's just so many people coming through there now. And
That's a
speaking
good
of the
point.
whole maintenance and offering, I mean, spilling virgin blood, I think is one way to kind of boost anything that's going for anything, right? I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, in any kind of ritual, that it brings something. You're wanting.
It stimulates the economy.
There you go. Exactly.
This is something that me and Lisa have even talked about. I don't think we've ever said it on the show, and I don't think she'll mind if I repeat it. But
No,
there's
go ahead.
even ideas that, and I really do think, and you mentioned the money, and I'll get to the money eventually, but that was something that reminded me about this. I do think Idaho 4 is definitely possible. I do think this case is definitely possible as being one, and maybe even Gilgo. But I do think, in a way, this is going to sound crazy, but we were actually questioning, is there almost real-time data analysis on true crime psyops? And one of it's going to start being if it's profitable, if we personify the victims enough, can they get donations? And in my opinion, this is just my opinion, I'm not knocking the people because I'm saying they're an occultist, but there is a lot of true crime shows out there that make it blatant to me that they're occultists, especially when you look at all the sigils in the fucking preview and in the live chats. I mean, they've got the same symbol on my arm in their chats. They're occultists to me, or something's going on. They seem to be the more of the say-so and the kind of monetizing on these crimes very well. And I do think it's because they're occultists. They see what's going on, and they're like, I'm going to ride this wave. I'm going to personify some of the victims. I'm going to personify Brian Kohlberger. I'm going to take a picture of him smiling and create this whole fake idea of what Brian Kohlberger is thinking about when, motherfucker, you've never met Brian Kohlberger. You don't know what's in his head. Chill the fuck out, my man. But, you have a lot of that shit going on, and it's selling so fucking much on YouTube right now. It is selling like crazy, these true crime cases, and I do think they know what's up, and they're riding the wave. Me and Lisa have even reused, what was that, Intellix? There was some kind of site where, like, you pay a couple of bucks and they'll actually do background checks. We ran the lady from the Happy Face Killers who started a GoFundMe for Asa Ellerup with the Gilgo Beach.
Oh, yeah,
and
I remember you mentioned that.
She has criminal history of money scandals.
Yeah.
Money theft. So it's like, come
Shocker.
on, what's going on with you people? There was GoFundMes coming out for crimes before they happened.
Yeah.
If you
Smiley
think about
Face
it, now you
Killers.
mentioned Oh, sorry to interject there, Nick. What were you saying?
No, just even with Smiley Face Killers, I'm almost positive there was people who had GoFundMes created like a day or two prior to their even death.
Yes.
Oh, wow.
Yes. There was one
I was
of the
not aware
victims.
of that.
Yeah.
There is money to be made behind true crime, and occultists
big
are
time.
going to take advantage of that.
Well, didn't the Gilgo fellow's wife didn't she get paid $1 million or something like that for Dateline or NBC or somebody?
Yes.
Asa's getting for Peacock.
Dateline.
I think Peacock or
I mean,
something.
if they're paying her $1 million, how much are
And
they
the
making on
lawyers.
advertising?
Yeah. The lawyers are getting money. The kids are getting money. Everybody's
Yeah.
getting
Yo,
money.
you know who's going to do a movie on it and who's been actually talking to, I think, visiting Rex Heuermann? 50 Cent.
Stop it.
What the fuck is going on here?
That doesn't make any sense.
Come on. And 50 Cent just recently came out and said that Diddy was responsible for Tupac's death. Like, this guy's just
Oh,
popping
wow.
up and just doing insane, weird shit recently, too.
Sounds like it.
But
It's a transition period in media.
to Nick's point, what you were saying, and I'm so glad you brought that
You're
up,
damn
is
right,
that
Headless.
in some of these journals where they talk about, the psychology with crime, the psychology of how it changes society and so forth, they mentioned in some of these articles that the only thing that was missing were data points in real time.
Which is what made me start wondering, especially with, I think, DARPA kicking in, with recent years, how do we know this is some of these things, they could be true, but like they're handed and presented in a certain way to catch your eye, and it's just, let's see how the public reacts.
I think
That's a good point.
It's, what is it called? Real life TV, but just on a cheaper budget.
Yeah.
Right.
It's just something
Some
I
next
thought
level
about.
social engineering right there.
Just something that I thought about, and we'll wrap it up there. We're a little bit over an hour and a half. Try to keep them a little bit shorter for people, so they don't get bored or whatever. They listen to the whole show. Thank you all for coming on. I really appreciate it. It was a very short notice. I happen to have a free Wednesday night, and I hit up everybody, and they're all able to make it. So I really do thank you all. There was a great conversation. I really enjoyed everything from all of you. That's why I asked you on. Instead of going through all of yous again, I will have Headless's stuff is in the bottom in the notes. I got JJ's in the bottom as well, or I'm pretty sure I have everybody's. I have BD's in the bottom as well. Lisa, you don't have anything to plug. You're just an occult reject. So yeah, everybody's stuff is in the bottom. Thank you all again for coming on, and thank you for everybody in the chat. That's what's up. Everybody jumping in on the live, and for people in the future, I am going to be trying to stream live to Instagram. I am right now, so if you happen to be on Instagram, you can watch the lives there as well. And until the next one, everybody be well. Later.